Listen carefully, the way you listen when the river speaks at midnight, when the old trees bend their necks toward the earth as if bound to something only they can see. Listen, because what I am about to tell you is not merely a story. It is a warning. It is a mirror. It is a truth that has walked barefoot through every village where men have confused the vessel for the river. In the heart of the land where the red earth breathes and the Iroko trees touch the sky like old men raising their hands in prayer, there sat the village of Okutora. Not a large village. Not a village written in the books of empires. But a village where joy was not borrowed, where laughter was not imported, where the people understood that life itself was the first and greatest gift a man could be given. And on the morning of the Omif festival Okutora became something the eye alone could not contain. From every compound, color burst forth like flowers refusing to stay hidden underground. Women wove fabrics of gold and indigo around their bodies like royalty wrapped in sunset. Children ran between the legs of elders with faces painted in ochre and white chalk, their laughter scattering into the air like seeds of joy. Old men sat on carved stools, clapping rhythms into their laps, nodding slowly to a beat as old as the earth beneath them. The smell of roasted plantain and palm oil stew moved through the morning air like a procession of ancestors returning home. Drums, the deep-talking drums, the high-voiced dun-dun, the ancient Ojin bells, all of them speaking together, saying what words alone can never say. The Omif Festival. A celebration of harvest, of memory, of gratitude. A time when Okutora said to the heavens, we remember where we came from. We have not forgotten. We are still here, And it was at this festival every year, without fail, that one sound rose above all others. Not the drums. Not the bells. Not the singing of 100 voices. But a flute. A single flute. Played by a young man named Kaya. Now, when I say this man could play the flute, I do not mean what you might imagine. I do not mean that he was skilled. Many men are skilled. I do not mean that he was talented. Talent is the tool, it is not the hand that holds it. I mean that when Kaya raised that long, dark bamboo flute to his lips, the world paused. Birds that were flying would stop mid-wind and circle. The wind would change direction, as if turning to face him. Women who were crying from sorrow would forget, for a moment, what they were crying about. Men who were angry would feel the knot in their chests loosen, just a little. Children would sit down. In the dust. Without being asked. And if you were standing close enough to Kaya when he played, not just listening, but truly close, you might hear, beneath the notes of the flute, something else. A low whisper. Not a human voice. Something older. Something from the place beyond the horizon where the sky meets the memory of all things. The elders heard it. They said nothing. But they heard it. Kaya himself, Kaya would play, and sometimes his eyes would flutter like a man in a dream, and a faint smile would rest on his face. As if someone, standing just behind his right shoulder, was whispering the music into his soul before his fingers knew what to do. He did not know then, he could not know that the whisper had a name. His father was Bamero. Say that name slowly. Let it rest in your mouth. Bomiaro. Bamero, the flutist of the eastern valleys. Bamero, whose music they said could call rain in the dry season and calm floods in the wet season. Bamero, who walked from village to village with nothing on his back but his flute, his sandals, and the grace of a man who understood his purpose. Bamero never asked for payment. He played because the music asked to be played. He played because he understood as clearly as he understood his own name that the gift did not belong to him. He would say, I am only the river's mouth. I did not make the water. Bamero died before Kaya was old enough to hold a flute. But Kaya's mother, a small fierce woman with eyes that saw too much, would tell him stories at night. Of Bamero's hands. Of Bamero's songs. Of the way the world seemed to breathe differently when his father played. And so Kaya grew up reaching for something he had never touched. Reaching for the music that was already in his blood, already in his bones, already waiting in the space behind his breath. The day Kaya first played the flute, he was 7 years old, and he played 3 perfect notes. His mother wept. Not from sadness. From recognition. She had heard those 3 notes before. She had heard them from Bamero's lips, in a different lifetime, in a different room, in the beginning of what had become her life. And so Bamero's spirit came to rest on his son's right shoulder. Guiding. Breathing. Waiting. Word travels faster than feet. Long before Kaya's voice had deepened into manhood, his music had already crossed rivers, climbed hills, and entered the ears of kings. The first king to send for him was Obafemi of the Northern Court, a heavy man with a heavy throne and a heavier sadness in his eyes since the death of his first wife. They brought Kaya in as a young man with bare feet and a borrowed robe, and he played, and by the 3rd song, the Oba was weeping openly, saying nothing, weeping the way a man weeps when something long buried finally rises to the surface. After that, the invitations multiplied like rain. Chiefs and queens. Festivals and funerals. Wedding halls and shrines. His name, Kaya, the flutist of Okutara, moved through the land like smoke through cloth, finding every crack, filling every room. Villagers lined the roads when he returned home. Children climbed fence posts to see him pass. Old women blessed him with their eyes, their lips moving in silent prayers of gratitude, as though he had returned something the village had lost long ago. And in those early days Kaya was still Kaya. Still the boy who played barefoot. Still the young man who bowed his head before the elders. Still the son of Bamero who had not yet forgotten that the water does not come from the river's mouth. In those days, the music still arrived whole, unbroken, flowing through him like something divine. In those days, the whisper was still clear on his right shoulder. But prosperity is a test wearing the costume of a gift. It begins slowly. It always begins slowly. First, it was a small thing. A refusal here. A demand there. A farmer invited Kaya to play at his daughter's naming ceremony. A simple gathering. A joyful occasion. But Kaya sent word back, his fee was too high for a farmer's purse. An elder's burial. The family asked for a song to accompany the old man's crossing. But Kaya was occupied with what, no one could say exactly, and he did not come. He hired a young boy to carry his flute case. Then 2 boys. Then he stopped walking to events on foot and began to be carried in a hammock, as though the ground itself was no longer worthy of his sandals. His childhood friends, men who had grown up chasing lizards with him in the dusty streets of Okutora, men who had laughed with him, hungered with him, believed in him before anyone else had stopped answering their calls. He stopped meeting them at the market. He stopped remembering their names in the presence of important men. And the music, here is where the wound first showed itself. The music began to change. Not all at once. Not in a way that the untrained ear could detect. But the elders noticed. The ones who were old enough to remember Bamero, who had felt that second presence in Kaya's playing, noticed that something was quieting at his right shoulder. The whisper was not gone. But it was growing faint. Like a fire not fed. Like a river slowly turned from its course. His mother noticed too. She tried, once, to speak to him of it. He smiled the smile of a man who has decided that his mother is wise but outdated, and he patted her hand, and he left. When a man stops listening to his source begins to look for another ear. The wedding of Chief Oran's son was the most expensive celebration Okutora had seen in a generation. Fabric from the coast. Meat roasted in 3 compounds. Musicians and dancers hired from 4 different villages. And Kaya was the crown jewel. He arrived in his finest robes, his flute case carried by 2 boys in matching cloth. He sat in the place of honor. He played. But something was wrong. He could feel it even as his fingers moved, the hollowness, a gap between himself and the music, like a man speaking words he no longer understands. The notes came out correct. The melody was right. But the feeling, the divine ache that used to move through him like warm rain, was not there. And when the celebration reached its peak, when the dancing was loudest and the laughter most full, no one came to thank him. No one paused to acknowledge him. The crowd swirled around him like a river around a stone, and he sat there, in his fine robes, invisible. Something cracked open inside him. He stood up. He walked to the ancient iron tree at the edge of the compound, and before anyone could understand what was happening, he had climbed it. This grown man, this celebrated musician, this voice of Okutora, he had climbed it, and from the branches, he shouted into the night air. I have given this village my life. I have carried your names to the ears of kings. And you sit there and you feast and you dance as if I am nothing. I am Kaya. I am the sound of this land. And none of you deserve me. Silence fell over the compound. The drums stopped. The dancing stopped. Children hid behind their mothers. Men looked at the ground. And the branches of the iron tree shuddered as if even the tree was ashamed. It was King Aduma who rose from his seat. Old King Aduma, whose voice was always quiet because he had learned long ago that a quiet voice carries further than a shout. He walked to the base of the tree, and he looked up at Kaya, this man in fine robes, clinging to branches, weeping with pride and pain, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, he said, "Come down, my son. A bird that shouts from a tree is still just a bird. Come down." Kaya came down. And King Aduma, before all assembled, did something that silenced every whisper. He removed the royal beaded chain from around his own neck, a chain that had been in the royal house of Okutora for 6 generations, and he placed it around Kaya's neck. He declared, "Kaya is the voice of Okutora. Let no man disrespect his gift." The crowd erupted. The drums returned. The night continued. But in the joy of that moment, something dangerous was being born. Because a man who needed a title to feel valued had already lost his way. And the spirit at his right shoulder stepped back, just slightly, into the shadow. The royal title settled on Kaya's shoulders like a crown of stone. He wore it everywhere. He introduced himself with it before his name. He had it sewn into his robe. He put it at the top of the letters he sent to other villages. He stopped attending small ceremonies entirely. The births, the graduations, the humble celebrations of ordinary people. He said these events were beneath the voice of Okutora. He ate alone. He slept behind closed doors. He dismissed anyone who came to him without a gift. He walked through Okutora as though he was visiting a foreign country, nodding at the people the way a king nods at subjects he tolerates but does not love. His compound grew. His possessions multiplied. But the rooms of his house echoed. Because the people who fill a man's life with real warmth, the ones who knew him before the title, before the fame, before the fine robes, had been turned away one too many times. They stopped coming. And in the silence of that big compound, in the stillness of those echoing rooms, Kaya noticed something he did not want to notice. The music, when he played alone at night, sounded thin. It sounded like a flute played by a man. Just a man. Nothing more. The whisper was gone. There is a woman in every community whom only the desperate visit. Not because she is frightening, But to seek her is to admit that you cannot solve your own problem, and for a proud man, that admission is more painful than the problem itself. Her name was Orifu. She lived at the edge of the forest where the sea-cotton tree. Kaya went to her at dusk, wrapped in a plain cloth so no one would recognize him. He sat across from her fire. He told her the music had grown weak. That something was missing. That he needed a remedy, a root, a preparation, a ritual, something to restore what had left him. Orifu listened without expression. She stirred the fire once. Then she looked at him the way very old eyes look, down through the surface of a man into the older, quieter truth underneath. And she said, I can give you many things, Kaya. I can give you roots from the forest floor and oil from the night blooming flower. I can make your throat strong and your fingers swift. But no potion in this world can strengthen a gift that does not belong to you alone. Kaya frowned. What do you mean? This gift is mine. I was born with it. Orifu shook her head slowly. As its carrier. There is a difference. A calabash does not own the water inside it. When the calabash forgets this, when it begins to think the water is its own, the water finds another calabash. She turned back to her fire. The conversation was over. Kaya stood, wrapped his cloth tighter, and walked back through the dark, denying with every step what he already knew was true. 3 days before the next Omi festival, word flew through Okutora like a stone thrown into still water. Kaya had collapsed. The messengers came at sunrise, breathless. He had been found in his compound, unmoving. The healers had come and gone with lowered eyes and shaking heads. There was no explanation. There was no warning. Okutora stopped. The market fell quiet. The festival preparations paused. Women stood in doorways with their hands pressed to their mouths. Men gathered at crossroads speaking in low voices, repeating the news as though saying it more times would make it less true. Children who had been chasing goats sat down in the dust and stared at the horizon, because even they understood that something enormous had shifted. He was not a perfect man. He had grown difficult. He had hurt feelings and broken friendships. He had climbed a tree and shouted shame upon himself in front of the whole village. He had worn his pride like armor and used it to keep love at a distance. But he was Okutora's. He was the sound of the village. And the village could not yet imagine itself without that sound. The mourning began. Deep, real, complicated mourning, the kind that carries grief and anger and love all at once, wound together like roots beneath the earth. The burial was attended by all of Okutora. King Aduma sat in the front, his face composed but his eyes full. The elders sat in a row, their silence heavier than speech. Women wailed in the traditional way, their voices rising and falling like waves. The coffin was carried in. And then, from the back of the crowd, from a place where no one important usually stood, a sound began. Soft at first. So soft that people thought they were imagining it. The kind of sound you think might be the wind, until the wind stops and the sound continues. A flute. People turned. Eyes searched the crowd. And there, standing alone at the edge of the gathering, barefoot, in simple cloth, with a cracked old flute raised to his lips, stood a young man named Tiga. No one had paid much attention to Tiga before. He was quiet. He was unremarkable in the way that deep rivers are unremarkable from the surface. He helped at his uncle's farm. He laughed easily. He asked for nothing. But what came from that cracked old flute? It moved through the crowd like a hand placed gently on every shoulder at once. It moved through the grief and held it carefully, the way a mother holds a crying child, not stopping the tears, but making the tears feel safe. Old women who had not wept in years wept now, not from sadness but from something they could not name, a longing, a recognition, a memory of something ancient and pure. And the elders, those who were old enough, those who remembered, they sat very still. Their eyes wide. Their mouths open. Because they had heard this before. They had heard this exact quality, this exact presence in the music, not in Kaya's best moments, but in a time long before Kaya. They had heard it in Bamiro. The flute was still singing its sorrow when the lid of the coffin moved. One sharp gasp from the front of the crowd. Then silence. Total silence. The lid pushed open. And Kaya sat up. Alive. Unwounded. His eyes blinked against the daylight. The crowd erupted not in joy, but in a chaos of confusion, of shock, of disbelief folding over itself. Someone screamed. Someone laughed, a high laugh of a person who doesn't know what else to do. Children ran. The elders rose to their feet. And Kaya looked out at the stunned faces of his village, and he tried to arrange his features into something dignified. He had planned this. He had staged this. He had thought, in the twisted logic of a man who has confused attention for love, that this would prove something. That dying and rising would remind Okutora of his value. That the village would weep, and he would return, and they would never again forget what he meant to them.